Leaving Mayence, the Empress returned to Paris by way of Aix-la-Chapelle, following the banks of the Rhine. She left on August 2nd on board a yacht, which the Prince of Nassau had placed at her service, the honors on board being done by an officer of the House of Nassau. Her suite was composed of the Duchess de Montebello, Count de Beauharnais, Knight of Honor, who had followed her to Mayence, Madame de Talouet, and Lauriston, General Caffarelli, the Chamberlains, Valgrenon, and Cornelis Cussy, the prefect of the palace, and myself. On arriving at St. Goar, the Empress's first care was to write to the Emperor. She continued her journey on the Rhine on the morrow, stopping at Koblenz and at Cologne. She left her yacht at the latter place and took to her carriage. She arrived at Aix-la-Chapelle on August 5th, visited the cathedral, and returned to St. Cloud by way of Liège, Namur, Soissons, and Compiègne. She was received in the cities in which she had stopped by the principal authorities and never failed to give them an audience before her departure. On our arrival at Koblenz, I found, to my great surprise, the wife of my colleague in a waiting room in the house which was intended for the Empress's residence. Her husband, who had remained at Dresden during the Emperor's journey to Mayence, had taken advantage of his absence to pay his wife a visit at Koblenz. Madame Meunier came with the wish to be presented to the Empress, and I was delighted to be able to render her this slight service. Madame de Montesquieu was waiting where the Empress's carriage stopped to place her son in her arms. He was then a very fine child with every appearance of strength and health, and his intelligence was developing in a remarkable manner. The Queen of Naples, Caroline, presented him with a little open carriage in which he used to drive about the castle gardens in great glee. This carriage was drawn by a team of sheep, which had been trained by the clever equerry. The inauguration of the Cherbourg harbor, which at first was to have taken place on the 15th August, the Emperor's name day, in order to give the Empress time to rest from the fatigues of the journey from Mayence. She was kind enough to dispense me from following her to Cherbourg. She arrived there, half dead with fatigue and quite broken up by the bad roads which she had met with after passing Carentan, suffocated with the dust and with a very bad cold on the chest, as she herself expressed it in letters dated August 25th and 26th. In another letter, which the Empress was good enough to write to me, she further told me, in speaking of this inauguration, the basin was opened yesterday, but the fine moment at which the water burst in with a rush and a roar happened just at the time when everybody was at dinner and nobody saw it, and a misfortune never comes alone. I also missed seeing the fireworks. The Congress had been opened at Prague to treat for peace. The disposition of the Allies was by no means pacific, but they were obliged to dissemble the fact. Austria had need of time to furnish her preparations for war. As a matter of fact, the Prague Congress was only a lure. Exchange of credentials even could not take place. The plenipotentiaries did not even see each other. Austria, who had set the price of abandonment of Illyria, half of Italy, the abandonment of Holland and Spain, on her alliance with France, when Napoleon had 300,000 men in the center of Germany, and as yet had not succeeded in her object, dominated in the Congress as mediator. Forgetting her part and the necessity of holding the scales with an equal hand, she looked after her own interests while pleading the cause of the coalition. The Congress, which was to have opened on July 5th, did not begin until the 29th. The Allies attributed the delay of the opening of the negotiations to the late arrival of the French plenipotentiaries, who did not assemble at Prague until the 27th. One was the Duc de Vicence, Caulaincourt, the other Count de Narbonne. The latter was at Prague at the same time as the Russian and Prussian plenipotentiaries. The Duc de Vicence, commissioned to treat for the prolongation of the truce, was detained at Neumarkt by the real or alleged non-arrival of the papers of the Allied commissioners, which delayed the signing of this convention until the 27th. Another motive which made the Emperor haste to send the Duc de Vicence immediately to Prague was the insulting choice, so Napoleon considered it, made by the Russian government in the person of Monsieur de Onstedt, a born Frenchman who was serving against France to represent Russia. He had been rejected by an imperial decree as a Frenchman intervening in the name of a foreign power in a treaty in which French interests were being discussed. The maintenance of the choice of this person was a sign that the Allies, who were sure of the cooperation of Austria, considered it unnecessary to treat us with ordinary courtesy. A general plan of campaign had been definitely decided upon in the conference at Trachenberg, in which Austria and Sweden had equally taken part. The Russian and Prussian envoys were sure in their minds and knew perfectly what to think of the real intentions of these two powers. The strong suspicions, amounting almost to certitude, which Napoleon had conceived of what was being plotted against him for several months past, forced him to circumspection and made it necessary for him to find out what were the traps which were being laid for him, as well as the end and the imminence of the dangers to which he was exposed. The armistice was to expire on August 10th. Could 12 days, a part of which was passed in discussion of the forms or of the traditions of usages observed in similar congresses, suffice to resolve the question, complicated by the conflict of many different interests, which had to be reconciled, and to effect the general pacification of Europe? These pressing and various interests were moreover complicated by the pretensions, both patent and dissimulated, of the mediating power. Other incidents provoked by the Russian and Prussian commissioners, who were backed up by the mediator, helped towards the utter waste of precious time. All three of them were at a loss what to imagine to shorten the duration of this ephemeral Congress. The mediator hid her perfidious designs under a show of goodwill towards the French negotiators, but flagrant perfidy and her whole conduct showed that Austria had only intervened in the Congress at Prague with the object of forcing our hands. At last, 3 days before the expiration of the truce, an ultimatum was notified to the French plenipotentiary. No ultimatum, even when it is expected, can be accepted without final examination. Time, which is materially necessary to grasp the nature of sacrifices against which there can be no appeal, is requisite. One must be able to yield with honor and without a loss of dignity. On the second day following, August 9th, Napoleon made known what concessions he consented to. They were those which had been asked for by the Allies, except the reserve of the harbor at Trieste, the possession of which interested the mediating power alone. France simply insisted on obtaining a guarantee of the integrity of Denmark. This last restriction in favor of a faithful ally was an act of loyalty. On the following day, the 10th, at midnight, the Allied plenipotentiaries, encouraged by the news of the reverses which our arms had suffered in Spain, and especially by our defeat at Vitoria, which put an end to French domination in that country, without answering the last proposals of our envoys, contented themselves in declaring through the Austrian plenipotentiary that their powers had expired. The Austrian plenipotentiary, in communicating this declaration, added that his mission was also terminated. Even in admitting that Austria's mediation had come to an end, all negotiations with this power should not have been refused to us. The Austrian cabinet, it is true, had prostituted the part of mediator by uniting itself to our enemies in spite of, or rather thanks to this title, but we were not nominally, at least at war with Emperor Francis. Austria had to justify the attitude which she was about to take towards us. Neutrality, alliance, or declaration of war. She preferred roughly to tear off that transparent mask with which she had so long covered her face and to declare war on France without any previous explanation. She was ready. All her arrangements with the coalition had been decided upon. Her act of treachery was accomplished. Napoleon was expecting an answer to his proposals when General Narbonne came to inform him of the dissolution of the Congress, a last hope still kept the Duc de Vicence back at Prague. On hearing this news, however, Napoleon gave his consent to all that had been asked of him and sent General Bubna off at full speed to carry it to the Emperor of Austria. The answer was that it was too late, some hours too late, and that he must address himself to the Emperor Alexander. This prince, who had arrived on the 16th at Branditz, where the Emperor of Austria was staying, rejected all proposals and urged the Austrian monarch to run the risk of war. At the same time, Austria's manifesto appeared. Mr. de Bassanot-Marais, in a final note addressed to Mr. de Metternich, after having pointed out to him the perfidy of this conduct, proposed to him the reunion of a Congress at which all powers, both great and small, should be represented, where all the questions should be solemnly laid down, and where it would not be expected that they should be decided upon either in a week or a month, where it would be their task to consult all interests, to compensate sacrifices which had been made, and to render peace advantageous and honorable for all. The Austrian minister answered in an evasive manner to this note, and the resumption of hostilities was fixed for August the 16th. If a peace concluded at Prague should have become a reality, it would without doubt have been a good thing, especially compared with the rigorous conditions which were afterwards imposed upon France. But we have been able to form an opinion upon the insincerity of the intentions of our enemies as well as of the mediating power. In the audience which Napoleon had awarded to Monsieur Metternich at Dresden in the previous month of June, he had reproached him with having allowed himself to be won over by England. The reproach was an imprudent one, but it was not this reproach which brought about Austria's desertion. The sole and real motive for this desertion was that the Cabinet of Vienna and other cabinets of the coalition, whose common interest it was to take advantage of our misfortunes in order to crush us out, were too closely bound up together. Austria had long since made the calculation that it would be better for her to unite herself to friends, strong in numbers, than to expose herself to the danger of remaining the benevolent auxiliary of an isolated ally. If instead of taking recourse to treachery and bad faith, the Austrian cabinet had frankly, without ambiguity, expounded wishes, which were quite natural in the position in which it was placed, Napoleon, convinced of its sincerity, would certainly have consented to sacrifices loyally asked for, feeling as he did that concessions on the part of France had become necessary. When one remembers the treaty which had been concluded 1 year previously between Austria and France, a treaty by which the two forces mutually guaranteed the integrity of each other's territory, one will understand all the fragility of political alliances, the indemnities, and the increase of territory asked for by Austria, which we had promised to grant her, were not only a compensation for the charges of her cooperation in the Russian expedition, but further, do not let us forget it, a monument to the intimate and lasting union which existed between two sovereigns. The unfortunate issue of the War of 1812 having made it impossible for France to keep her promises, Austria thought it safer to forget her engagements and to crush us. Already in the month of February, she had changed her feelings without, however, having as yet modified her language. The Vienna cabinet has itself admitted that the Allies and Austria were already agreed in principle before this union was consecrated by treaties. Why then such a profusion of lying protestations? Because Austria needed the time to complete her armaments and to prepare her desertion. It is admitted that this crafty derogation on the part of the Vienna cabinet from the spirit which had dictated the terms of Austria's alliance with France in 1812, and this violation of plighted faith, can be excused as very skillful political calculations. However this may be, this Austrian government, according to our opinion, was called to play another part, the effects of which would have been more profitable to Austria in the future, and above all, would have been more honorable to the character of the Austrian minister. The cabinet of Vienna ought to have remained faithful to the policy which had led to the sacrifice of one of the Archduchesses of Austria, to have united itself closely to France from that day forward, and thus have forced Napoleon to take this attitude of Austria, both wise and loyal at the same time, into account. Instead of following this line of action, the Austrian government, without at first conceding the idea of overthrowing Napoleon, thought only of profiting by his despoilment by entering into the general European coalition. It has frequently been said that if we had thrown gold into the scale, the balance would have been in our favor. That is still the opinion of a number of people who think corruption an important element of success. That was also Fouché's doctrine. During the Prague Congress, the emperor showed him a very handsome snuff box enriched with diamonds, which he intended for Monsieur de Metternich. Do you know, said Napoleon, that this is a present of 30,000 francs? And it is with that, cried Fouché, interrupting him, that you expect to win over the Austrian minister? It's not 30,000 francs that you ought to give him, but millions. The emperor answered with a gesture of disgust to the cynicism of this remark, addressed to the man who had the greatest horror of corruption. A fact which appears to be above doubt and which will be entirely revealed in time. It is that a secret council presided over by the Emperor of Austria and composed of a very small number of his most intimate counselors was held at Vienna before the departure of the minister Metternich to Dresden. The names of the persons who composed this council are mentioned, and it is stated that at this council the reasons which should engage the Austrian cabinet to remain true to the French alliance or to abandon and make common cause with the Allies were vigorously discussed. The former minister, Count Baldani, known for the energy of his opposition to France, was summoned to this council. Set aside at the moment of Marie-Louise's marriage, the enmity with which the French press treated this minister had caused the Emperor of Austria, whose confidence in him was increased by this circumstance, to recall him. One can easily imagine what opinions were expressed by this person during the discussion of this serious question. Suffice it to say that the majority of the council expressed the opinion that the alliance with France had not produced the favorable results which had been hoped for, that fidelity to this alliance would be sterile, and that Austria, on the other hand, would derive real and decisive advantages by placing herself on the side of the Allies. The Austrian government accordingly made up its mind to come to an understanding with the Allies and to prepare for a rupture with France. Furnished with instructions in this spirit, Monsieur de Metternich left for Dresden. The result of this minister's mission and his conversation with Napoleon, a conversation in which Metternich, so to say, laid at one stroke the foundations of the monument, brilliant rather than solid, which he proposed to raise in reestablishing the greatness of the Austrian Empire. These things are well known. Metternich, moreover, in putting on the maintenance of his master's alliance the price of the abandonment of Illyria, of one half of Italy, of the Protectorate of the Confederation of the Rhine, of Holland and Spain, was sure of revolting Napoleon's legitimate pride and of bringing him to the break of feeble bonds between two empires, which he still hesitated to destroy. These cunning negotiations bring me to speak of the reproach made against the Duke de Bassano, Marais, of having dissuaded the emperor from signing the peace at Prague and under other decisive circumstances. I do not know on what foundation such an accusation has been based. It shows but a poor knowledge of Napoleon's character to imagine that he was accessible to the insinuations and influence of those about him when capital resolutions, of which he considered himself the sole judge, had to be taken, no matter how great his confidence might be in the lights of his counselors. This reflection, moreover, cannot be applied to the Duke de Bassano, who was in favor of peace. This minister will hold an honorable place amongst the faithful men who placed their faculties and their devotion at the emperor's service, who helped him in his noble task of working for the good and for the greatness of his country, and whose zeal was neither servile nor blind. His will always be the merit of having served France in the person of his chief with fidelity and discernment, of never having served ill of his confidence, and of having remained true to him in adversity